What's the special trick?
Diary writing, basically. I've got my diary here. It has loads of like highlighter colours all over it. It's mad. Explaining things to them on their level is one way of just building that resilience in them, so that they know what's going on in the outside world. Asking how they are and meaning it. So not just a flippant question like, how are you? I actually want to know how you are. Having your friends and peers around, it is really important for children, their social development, their mental health. Online tutoring, even though it seems like we're so far apart, is bringing children together in some way.
Welcome to the Qualified Tutor Podcast. I'm your host, Ludo Miller, and I'll be interviewing tutors and thought leaders from across the tutoring landscape to inspire, inform, and motivate you to become the best tutor you can be. The Qualified Tutor community is a safe and supportive space for tutors who love to learn and grow. We offer training, resources, ideas, and a chance to connect with like-minded tutors. If you'd like to continue the conversation, join our Qualified Tutor community at www.qualifiedtutorcommunity.org or find it in the show notes. Welcome to Linda Larby, and welcome to the next episode of the Qualified Tutor Podcast. This is our 60th episode, so there's a bit of celebratory buzz going on around here. A university researcher at UCL, and we'll be hearing more about the big plans that Linda and her team are working on there, and having completed an MSc in child development. Linda joins us today to discuss her experiences in the field of mental health and particularly that of children during the pandemic. This is an area that we cover in detail in the first and the fourth workshops of our level 3 qualification for tutors. And so we're very pleased to hopefully be adding this pod as further listening for all course participants and of course you today, our listeners. So welcome, Linda. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday to you too. Thank you for having me.
Not at all. The sun's coming out, the weather's getting good. It's a good time to be discussing a topic like this, to be discussing how children and tutors can be accessing and approaching their mental health coming out of a lockdown. But before we get into a little bit more of that and the work that you've been doing and the expertise that you have, I'd like to start with a question that we often start with, and which I'm very interested to hear the answer today. Linda, what kind of a student were you?
That's a good question. So I think to most people, I came across as quite shy if I didn't know you. However, if I did know you, it was a completely different experience. So I think initially, I came off as quite shy, very studious, but with the subjects that I liked. If I didn't like something, it wasn't so up my alley. Not that I wouldn't put effort into it. It would be more that I'd have to just struggle through it to get that grade or get that exam done. And
so teachers knew when you didn't like a topic?
I wouldn't say they didn't know, but I think they would probably see where I was putting in more effort and what I was more passionate about, definitely.
Okay, bro. Well, hopefully we can get onto those passions. Okay, so tell us a little bit more about what you've been working on in the past year or so.
So in the past year, I have completed my MSc from the Institute of Education at UCL in child development. So I started in 2019, finished sort of October 2020. It was a bit longer than expected just because of the pandemic and having to change like dissertation topics and all these lovely things. But the majority of last year was spent completing my MSc. I then went on to working with UCL as a content developer, helping lecturers get all their content online as education, even in higher education, things were changing quite rapidly. And then now I'm working alongside that as a research assistant, looking into university responses to Black Lives Matter. And then, of course, I'm tutoring on the side with Manning as well.
Okay, so how do you keep all of these things going in your mind, Linda? What's the special trick?
Diary writing, basically. I've got my diary here. It has loads of like highlighter colors all over it. It's mad. But honestly, I have to say keeping on top of it is easier because I have a passion for both tutoring and what I'm doing at the moment with UCL. I think they're both really important projects, especially the tutoring scheme at the moment. So I think that helps me to keep on top of it just because it is important for me and it's important for the people that are involved as well.
Yeah, okay. So finding something that you love doing. There's that old cliche. I won't even bother saying the old cliche, but we know what that is. So how did you get into the tutoring then? Did that start in your undergraduate days or even before that?
So tutoring, I actually started off by myself. So before I was hired by Manning, as a way of earning extra income, I used to put Gumtree adverts out
Very good.
for people that needed help with psychology, but at university level. So it was psychology and also things that branch off psychology. For example, I tutored someone that was doing a BA in education, but she just needed help with like essay layouts, reading through her dissertation, suggesting things. And then I was hired by Manning's when I was just starting my MSc. I actually then had to take a break because it was just a lot going on with completing a full-time master's at the same time. So I got back into it this year. And Johnny very kindly had held my position ready for me to take that back up again.
Oh, very nice. Yeah. Okay. The Gumtree ad. I've not heard of the Tutors Gumtree ad before, but that sounds like it could be a productive place. Maybe that's one tip to take away if you're looking for new tutoring work and listening to this. Thank you, Linda.
Definitely.
Very good. So just moving towards kind of, I guess, this lockdown specifically, so in the past year, and some of the impacts that it has had, it's obviously impacted all of us, and we can't expect to cover this whole topic in just one podcast. But in your experience in the past year, Linda, what do you think have been some of the biggest impacts of the lockdown really on students' mental health?
I would say one of the biggest straight off the bat is the fact that students have not been surrounded by their peers. They haven't been able to see their friends in a normal setting, under normal circumstances. And having your friends and peers around, it is really important for children, their social development, their mental health, having peers that you can rely on. For children, talking to peers is very different to talking to adults. So if they've gone from having their friends around, being able to play outside, to just having, parents around or guardians at home, even though they could rely on those relationships as well, it's a very different dynamic to being able to quickly talk to your friend about something or unloading and just having fun with your friends. So I think that's one of the biggest impacts that the pandemic has had.
Yeah. So did your MSc in child development prepare you in any way for this year and the effects it's had on children, or?
I think it did in a sense, because I've always been interested in children's mental health and well-being. So a lot of what I was taught at MSc level and a lot of what I was reading was about children's mental health and well-being, but more in the context of learning and atypical development, things like autism, global developmental delay, that sort of thing. But it definitely feeds into mainstream, and it feeds into everything that children are experiencing at the moment.
Yeah. So I'm interested to know how much do things like tutoring and teaching, how much are they part of a master's in a topic area like child development? Are they things that are brought up in the teaching and the studying?
Yes. So I guess this is why my particular course was part of the Institute of Education's programs, because it does touch upon the most effective ways of teaching these children, especially when you're looking at atypical development. It's thinking on a broader sense. For example, for autism, what is the best way of honing their skills in a certain subject? It isn't too concentrated on that, but we definitely did touch on education within that context.
Okay, brilliant. Well, bringing that kind of academic rigor and research into the world of tutoring is, certainly very much appreciated and welcome and part of the continuing rise of tutoring as a professional industry, rather than something that people do on the side and don't get their teeth into and that kind of thing. So that's a brilliant approach to have, Linda.
Mm-hmm.
So just thinking of some of the ways that tutors can help out with the effects that a lockdown may have had on a student's development. What can a tutor do in a session that deals with some of these effects?
I would definitely say not jumping straight into your session with, okay, equations, let's go, let's just do this. Because I think with any sort of conversation, any kind of relationship building, you need to start gently. So I never just jump straight into my sessions. I'm always asking how they are, how their week's been. And at first you get, the standard answers like good. But then once you've built a relationship, they're able to tell you, oh, I did this, or something happened this week and I'm not in the mood for tutoring, that sort of thing. But I definitely say just asking how they are and meaning it. So not just a flippant question like, how are you? I actually want to know how you are. So I think just having that sort of relationship with your students straight away is quite a good place to start.
Yeah, it can often be, maybe if you have an early morning session or a session right after school, your first couple of minutes, you're expecting, you're, as the tutor, you're bright-eyed and you're ready to go for the session, and the first question is, oh, how was your day? Yeah, good. Suddenly you think all the energy has been drained from the session, but of course it has. They're working their way into the session. So, do you have any more tips that you could add there for getting a child's kind of thinking and learning, and any games that you play to start off to keep child interested?
Definitely. It's funny you've asked that, because I also shared this in the last QT Zoom meeting that we had. I always start with an icebreaker. So it could be match the following definitions that we did in the last lesson, sort of like a game. In my very first tutoring sessions, if I'm just starting off with a school and with a particular class, I do a game called One Like and One Dislike about that subject. So the premise of that is the thing that they say they dislike is normally the thing they're struggling a bit with within that subject. And it's just quite a nice way of informally saying, okay, what is it that you're not quite getting in class at the moment? I always try and build in games. For example, within my year 7 science class, we just did electricity. So it was just, how many things around the home can you think of that use electricity? You've got 2 minutes and see if you can beat my score kind of thing. Just throwing in things like that.
Yeah. Okay. So actually, maybe online tutoring has helped in that, you can what's the word? You can harness a student's knowledge of their own home really to get things going. Their comfort in their own home. Okay, that's very okay. So if I do a session on electricity, that's my number one game. Fortunately, some of my tutoring sessions are often a piece of 11 plus written, a poem or a text. But maybe I need to think of some more ways to elucidate all that. Okay, brilliant. So we've got starting the session with getting to know how they're feeling that day, asking them about their day, asking them perhaps what they found tricky at school, what they really enjoyed, any memories from the day, and then maybe a couple of games or activities just to get them kick-started. And that will last kind of typically no longer than 5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah, definitely no longer than about 5 to 10 minutes. Because obviously we have other content to cover as well. But I do think when I get to the end of the session and say there's 5 minutes left, we can fit another one in. But typically at the beginning, just 5 to 10 minutes on that.
Brilliant, yeah. So there, as we were talking about before, there's a whole load of resources and podcasts and videos and audiobooks about mental health and coping with some of the areas that brings out kind of in yourself, and obviously since lockdown has begun, that those resources have only really exploded because of the effects of lockdown. But what perhaps it would be a good place to start really with what are some of the common misconceptions that people have about children's mental health and well-being?
I think one of the most common misconceptions is that children are not as resilient as you think. So that might not be a misconception actually, but what I'm trying to say is children are a lot more resilient than you think. So, this lockdown has had a massive impact, but they will bounce back from this. So anything that they're going through now, it isn't so much of a huge... it is a huge issue, but it's not so much that they're never going to recover from this. They will. Children are ridiculously resilient. But also just thinking that, especially on the social aspect of side of things, they aren't adults. So they do need to be talked to in a particular way. They need to be, you need to be able to explain to them what is going on. Probably not on the level of the news or anything like that, but just to let them know, what the current situation is, why they can't see their friends in the particular way that they'd like to. And you'll be surprised how children actually do understand these things. And it's always having something to look forward to, I guess, as the rules in lockdown relax.
Yeah. So are there any ways that we can help, increase our students' resilience, consciously or even kind of without them really noticing?
I would say just keeping them updated. So, for example, I'm not all the time, but sometimes in my sessions, if there has been a rule that's been relaxed that week, I might say, have you managed to go out and play football with that friend that you haven't seen in ages? So I think explaining things to them on their level is one way of just building that resilience in them, so that they know what's going on in the outside world. I'd also encourage, even if they can't meet up with all of their friends, a bit like we adults are doing, we're meeting up on Zoom, we're having these sessions, might be meeting up with friends on Zoom that you can't see yet in person or can't, stay over or all these things. So I think just building in things for them that allow them to still see their friends in some way or another, even though things are relaxing now, but just on a greater scale.
Yeah, and you had a great story that you told me that's coming out in a blog piece that we're working on together, and which you mentioned in the community about, what was it? It was students meeting up online who'd never have met up if it hadn't been for
Yeah.
lockdown.
So it was
I love the
actually
story.
two, and it was in the same week, which is crazy, and it was a day after each other. So in one school, they have several different classes for the same year. So these children would have heard of each other, but not necessarily made friends with the other person. So I had a case where they were just logging in and they just couldn't wait to tell me that, oh, I've played with this person. We were playing football outside, and they didn't talk to each other before. And that just shows how online tutoring, even though it seems like we're so far apart, is bringing children together in some way. These children they knew of each other, but outside of that class hadn't really made an effort with each other outside of that, which is so nice to see. And that was a really productive session as well. I think they'd just come in from playing football. So, their brains were ready to learn and everything. So they were very excited to tell me that.
Okay, so we might have found the perfect formula for a session then, is it? It's a bit of exercise, and two children who've met each other who would never otherwise have perhaps come across each other.
Exactly.
Yeah, and the blog that we're releasing soon will be exactly on that theme, just about how the move to the online world has allowed people to connect who would never have been given the chance to connect before.
Exactly.
And that's really down to the conditions that the lockdown has created, which obviously have largely been very frustrating for everyone. But if there's positives to take from it, then it's exactly that. Okay, so that's another important point to remember. I love just a little bit of exercise before they come into the session. That's a good one to remember.
Yeah.
And I remember back when I first started tutoring, I worked with this child near where I live in Gloucestershire. And I used to spend 4 or 5 hours with him in one go. And the best, just as you said there, the best 20, 30 minutes we had was just after we kicked a ball about in the garden and had a piece of toast. And I could always tell in the sessions before we had that break, I could just see his mind, I could just see his eyes flitting towards the garden outside that he had, and I could just see him getting slightly distracted. So I guess it's almost like a carrot and stick, isn't it? They have that reward coming up, and you have to work with that and be aware that children, obviously, just like adults, get distracted.
Exactly.
Yeah. So just on the theme we were just touching on there, on what's some of the positive traits that have come from this lockdown. What skills do you think children have actually improved or have been improved by this pandemic?
That is such a good question. I think this pandemic has forced everyone to just stop, and think. Our lives before, and it seems so crazy, but that was 2019 kind of time. That was a completely different life to what we're living now. So I think in this pandemic, children as well as adults have been forced to sort of stop and think and listen and hone in on those skills that are, kind of intrapersonal within yourself. There's now ample amounts of time to sit and think, read a book, listen to podcasts, and sort of do things in a way that is completely different to how you were doing it before. I definitely think critical thinking as well, just given all this time that we've had to, think about that book that you're reading, and did you really like it? Are you going to recommend it to your friend? That sort of thing. It sort of forced us to stop and, hone in on those skills.
Yeah, it's certainly a moment to pause, and I say a moment, I mean almost 18 months now, but to pause and reflect and to take kind of greater care of you, yourself and your body and your mind. So yeah, I guess perhaps adults maybe are more aware of that, ostensibly, but certainly children have felt that as well, haven't they? That life has slowed somewhat, and that they've had more time to by themselves to read that book or to go for that walk or whatever it is. Brilliant. Well, that's a really good summary of kind of the work that you've been doing and the things that you've picked up on, in the last year, and of course in the tutoring that's come back into your life, Linda, in the last year or so, which is so pleasing to hear. So what does the rest of the summer hold for you then, Linda? What does the rest of this year hold?
Good question. So tutoring naturally comes to a sort of slow, not quite an end, but definitely slows down when the kids are on summer holidays. I will be carrying on with this research role that I have at UCL. That naturally will sort of tailor down in the holidays as well. So I am at the moment, I say I'm going to be really cracking on with these job applications, either within higher education, because I've actually really liked working for the university, but also within child mental health and wellbeing. I think I am always going to have tutoring as a role, probably more a supporting role to a main role, but it has been brilliant this year, and I can't thank Mannings enough, really, and QT. It's been great.
Wonderful, yeah. So just to end, it's someone, one of our listeners who is looking to get into tutoring and has heard Mannings kind of a few times. What can the tutor expect from working for Mannings?
They are such a very personable company. So we have sort of tutor meetups. It is a growing company. So they were a lot smaller when I joined, but now, especially with the NCP scheme, it's growing and growing and growing. They are a lovely company to work for. Johnny and everyone that's there will really try and find you roles to suit you. Obviously, this kind of tutoring fits around your schedule as well. So they are very respectful of your time, which is great.
Yeah, which is very useful if you're trying to fit in your sessions with the other things that you do kind of in your work or in your undergraduate degree or master's. So yes, I fully endorse Mannings tutors and the wonderful work they're doing. Thank you so much, Linda. That was a very succinct and very helpful conversation for people working with students and people who, even tutors who are grappling with their own well-being during the past year. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed coming on. I wish you all the best for the research role.
Thank you so much.
Looking forward to this summer with obviously the Love Tutoring Festival that will be taking place at the end of June, which Linda will have. There's a surprise coming for all of those attendees who will be attending the festival this summer, and we're ending the festival with a wonderful day of events in which Linda will be taking part as well. So catch Linda there, catch Linda within the QT community, and obviously if you are thinking of working for Mannings, you will have the pleasure of coming across Linda as well. So thank you once again, Linda.
Thank you for having me.
That's not a problem, and we'll catch up again in the community.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Qualified Tutor podcast, where tutors share their expertise to support the tutoring community. If you'd like to continue the conversation, join our Qualified Tutor community at www.qualifiedtutorcommunity.org or find it in the show notes below. We exist to connect, share, and learn with you because tutoring is a small job that makes a big difference.